Legends Whispers across the nine realms. I'm your host, Mark Peterson, and today with me, I have Christopher Allen.
Hey, how's it going, Mark?
Going good. Today's episode's title is The Moments Before the Fall. Today, we're talking about what happens right before someone breaks, and there's nothing usually no one can ever do. Kind of like we did with our first episode, we're going to break it down into kind of sections, but not really keep track of what's going on. This is kind of just going to be a conversation of talking about, you know, what happens at, right before, someone takes their life from suicide. And, Chris has a lot of experience, in this field. He works in mental health. He works with the American Association for Suicidology, American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and now recently, NAMI as a board member. He's a board member on the other two as well. But just recently, NAMI. So I guess we'll go ahead and get into it. Um, you know, I think that our last conversation that I had with Amber and Jason really opened up this season in a way that I was not expecting. And there's just been a lot of you know really really good things that have happened since releasing that episode. And I think with this episode it kind of it's kind of going to be like we're getting to that point of yeah, this is raw, this is deep, but what actually happens in someone's mind right before they take their lives, right? Is it is it neurological? Is it what is it, what causes that tick right before something happens, before someone breaks to say, hey, I don't want to live anymore, I'm just going to go ahead and just off myself. And I think one of the things that happens too when someone does this and someone has these actual thoughts, I think what really truly happens is the families, the friends, everybody that thinks that everything is okay, and then when it happens, it's a ripple effect through either a generation, either generations. It just depends.
Absolutely. You know, when someone dies by suicide, a lot of times the moments leading up to that, um, they don't fall apart in public. They're trying to keep the outward persona, you know, keep it going, keep it, whether they're a provider or whether they're at work, whether they're a service member, whether they're law enforcement. They have a persona that they feel typically that they need to maintain. So, they're not falling apart in public, but I mean, you can be looking at them and everything will seem okay, but inside they're not okay. I've had those days, right? I have to go to work. I have to do the thing. I recently retired from the military, but even in the military, especially as a military police officer, there's a certain persona that the public, even inside the military, they expect you to have. So, I could look a certain way on the inside, but on the outside, but on the inside, I might be personally having, a really, bad day. But we're good actors as humans. So we don't do that in public. We do that, behind closed doors, so to speak.
Yeah, and I'm glad you kind of brought up the service in general. We see 22 veterans a day take their lives. That is just ridiculous. And I think that a lot of stuff that I've learned over the years with the military veterans and just being a military brat myself, uh, it's that retirement phase. It's the retirement phase where a lot of soldiers and or former service members, get to that point of seclusion. They're not able to work, they're not able to do anything. They shut themselves off. And I don't think that they're doing it on purpose. I think they're doing it because they don't have any other way of actually interacting with humans at that point in time because of everything that they're dealing with in their own lives, whether it be the VA, whether it be benefits, whether it be people in general. Um, and I think one of the big things that happens to former service members is they get into a routine, and that routine can sometimes be the ultimate path to suicide. And I don't think that it is truly what they're wanting to do. I think it just happens.
Well, and I don't want to oversimplify it. Well, first off, I'm not a doctor. I mean, I am going to college eventually. I'll never be a doctor, but hopefully I'll be a trained counselor one day. In but I have been working in suicide prevention for a long time. And again, I don't want to oversimplify it, but a lot of times it comes down to um, exhaustion and pain. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. So, I teach suicide prevention classes, assist being one of them. And in that, class, when we're talking, I'll ask the participants, what hurts more, physical pain or emotional pain? And that really is a trick question because emotional pain um, will give you this exact same physical feelings as physical pain. And so it becomes almost impossible to differentiate. You as a human um, can only handle so much pain. If it's a physical pain, you know, people will pass out sometimes because of the pain. It just so emotional pain can be just as exhausting. And then so I'll ask somebody else. We'll be teaching a driver safety class, in the military, and I'll ask someone what's more dangerous, driving under the influence or driving while you're tired. And again, it's a trick question. If you are so tired to the point where it is hard to make rational decisions, it really does come down to your decision making capability. That's just as dangerous, getting behind a wheel, tired. And in the realm of suicide intervention, we do talk about sleep a lot. How are you sleeping? Are you actually, and it's not just about the time, but I hear very often, even in my own life, whenever I get in certain phases where I'm only maybe sleeping 3 or 4 hours a night. So you take the exhaustion and you marry it with the pain, and then it just turns into survival mode. And especially in the military, you're used to making decisions. And so if you're making decisions while you're exhausted and you're in pain, you have a diminished capability to make decisions, but in that moment that if you cease to exist, you won't feel the pain anymore. So again, I don't want to oversimplify it because it's a very broad topic, suicidology, but a lot of times it does come down to, exhaustion and pain and the time leading up to that. And it's exhausting just in and of itself, maintaining that persona, right? You're living a life in front of other people, and then you have your own life that you're dealing with behind closed doors, so to speak. And it just becomes exhausting to where, unfortunately, for 6 to 7 thousand of our service members, our veterans, every year, they make the choice to die by suicide, and I think that's what I don't think. I know that's what brings, you and I together and the members of Troa together because we want to be part of the solution. We want to be able to not just, talk about what's going on, not just awareness, but actually getting in front of this, I'll call it, a public health crisis, really, and being part of the solution to where we can find, talk to, and help um, anybody, but especially, we're talking about veterans and service members, getting ahead of the crisis and help them before they make the decision, to die by suicide.
Yeah, and I think what you just honestly, head up on is the build up. You head up on that build up right before not just the fall, but before, everything else that's going on in that individual's life, whether it be a veteran, whether it be, first responder, whether it be just a normal, civilian, right? I think that we as humans, just like you said, we can only tolerate so much pain. And I think with the mental health crisis that is going on right now with, death by suicide, and it's at an alarming rate. It's increased since 2021, since COVID. And I think that some people think that it's a norm. And I think that's where the stigma is coming from is all these, like, I believe we talked about, like, a while back we talked about, the different generations, right? You grow up, in one generation, you do what you do and that's it. You don't ask any questions, you don't talk about your feelings, you do what you're told to do, and you suck it up and you become, you be a man. And then now you have a generation right now that doesn't want to work and then expects, if they lose a job, they go into a depression, and then it just trickles downhill from there, and then, death by suicide. And I think that that's a scary way to think about a lot of that for people.
Absolutely. And we the amount of people, 45 to 50,000 people that die by suicide in the US, about 7 to 800,000 worldwide that die by suicide. That's literally just tip of the iceberg.
Mhm.
There are a lot of factors that we don't have time to go into today that feed into, why somebody makes that decision. But just in America at any given time, you'll have millions of people that are having the thought of suicide. Now, the good takeaway from that is that we don't have millions of people dying by suicide. But the fact of the matter is, we still have tens of thousands. And if we want to affect change on those tens of thousands, we have to talk about the millions of people that suffer in silence. You mentioned COVID. Connectedness is a major factor when we talk about when somebody is thinking about suicide. We talk about becoming withdrawn, becoming a loner, not engaging with folks. They're not connected anymore, and the whole world in one way or the other was affected by COVID because what did it do? It separated all of us. It gave this the 6 foot bubble around all of us that we could not interact with others. I had two children that spent a year and a half going through school at the house, so they could see their friends on TV on their computer screens, but they could not interact with them. So in essence, they were still, even though they could see them, they could not interact with them and they could not connect with them. In some ways, I think that's kind of worse. But the same thing happened to many of us. We were taken out, of our work atmosphere, you know, work family. We were taken out of our churches and synagogues and other religious meeting places. I mean, all of these areas typically is where we come together to form bonds. And for an extended period of time, we were not able to do that. So, we talk about the signs and symptoms of somebody thinking about suicide. Well, the world imposed one of those symptoms. It forced isolation. And so what really we've always been combating this, but especially since COVID, is rebuilding those connections. I mean, our children that grew up in that time frame lost some social skills, lost some ability to make social connections to where they've moved into this, they were already in the online world, but now that's their only connection is the online world. And in
Yeah.
Troa, say we're a gaming community, right? But we can
Mhm.
also be connected in the real world. And so that I feel anyway, since my short exposure to Troa, is that what we have to offer, you know, not just a gaming platform, but also segmented areas of our online presence that where you have caring human beings that are willing and able, that's an important part, being trained and able to have a serious conversation with someone who may be thinking about suicide or they may be thinking about other mental health stressors. um, Being able to talk to another live human being that possibly has gone through some of the same things that you've gone through, and then be able to move that isolated, secluded feeling into an area where they can get some real um, mental help. I mean, we have 988, so we, can help somebody and actually walk with them from the time that they're having the crisis, continue to walk with them until they get the help through the 998 call centers, and we could even continue to walk them through what next. If they're a veteran, what kind of resources out there for the veteran. There are tons, but it's finding the right resource for the right person. That's the trick, and that's where Troa steps in, and we will stay with someone, until they get the level of care that they need.
Yeah. You nailed on a lot of really good points, and I think one of the big ones is what COVID did to humanity. Um, you know, once everything had settled down, the first thing that you notice is that a lot of people are really comfortable with working from home. I can do more at home. I can do this. I can do that. And then when they were called back into the office, a lot of people had a reality wake up check, and a lot of people went into depressions because of it because they had to go back to the office 3 to 4 times a week or something like that. And I think that just because of COVID, I think that the world saw an increase in not just suicides, but also depression, anxiety, all the mental health disorders that are out there. I think that there was a huge spike because of how that all happened. And I remember, I had to go into the office. I was an engineer, and I just wore my mask. I did what I was supposed to. I followed the protocols, and I was fine. But I mean, COVID introduced a lot of panic. It introduced a lot of fear. It introduced a lot of things that now, if you look back on, is like, oh, well, we should have done this better. And I think that's kind of what the goal for Troa is with mental health is to establish a foundation of either resources of individuals of our mental health department is just blossoming and growing, right? Getting those people and getting those heads and feet out the door to start to actually talk about suicide, because the one thing about suicide is it doesn't discriminate, doesn't care who you are, it doesn't matter what you do, where you come from. If you have thoughts of suicide, you need to contact 988. And that's for all the listeners right now. If you do have thoughts of suicide, call 988. They will help you. Um, and you will be more surprised probably than you thought. Maybe it's just a fear of contacting that number. I mean, that number is scary because it is associated with a very word that no one likes, suicide. And we use that word in Troa all the time because that is the stigma. The stigma is saying that word, suicide, mental health disorder. Our goal is to stop the stigma on mental health. And the only way you can do that is if you keep talking about it.
Well, and that's why I mean, since day one, whenever I met you, you talked about, stop the stigma campaign. And stigma goes a lot of different directions. You do have the stigma of our culture, that thank goodness has changed over the years. It's not completely gone away. People are typically not seen as weak anymore when they go seek mental health. I mean, you would not um, look down on someone who broke their arm or leg about going to the doctor and getting x-rays and getting a cast and healing and then going to physical therapy to recover and be as strong as you can after that. And so we're getting to the point where we're treating mental health just as important as physical health. Even in the military, they're, thank goodness, now looking at not just the physical side of somebody's well-being, but the mental side of somebody's well-being. Who do you want shoulder to shoulder with you, when you're, in combat? You want somebody who's physically and mentally as healthy as possible so that both of you can come back, to your loved ones. But so that's part of the stigma. And so the other part of the stigma is internally. I am the strong one. I am the one, that's always taking care of someone else. And so I think someone who's struggling, speaking to myself as well, and also speaking to the listeners of this podcast, that, you know, if you're listening to this podcast and thinking, you know what, there's some really good information on this podcast, I should go take this information and help someone else. That's good. But I'm hoping also that you will internalize these helping resources to help yourself. When somebody is struggling, they'll use humor as a deflection. They'll use, you know, they use their high performance as a way of coping with what they're struggling with internally. So outside, they could look like somebody who's overworking, somebody who is arriving to work early, staying late, trying to take on, more than probably what they need to. Maybe they don't share as much as they could. They have the mentality, the stigma on the inside of saying, I'm the strong one. I'm for everyone else. So while they're helping others, which is wonderful. I'm not saying you shouldn't help other people, but they're also silently deteriorating on the inside.
Yeah, I think the warning signs also are indication of an individual going through a mental health crisis. I think that if someone is starting to isolate themselves, if they are feeling numb, if there is an automatic, like, weird calm, sudden calm, I guess is what you would call it.
Yep.
And then they're pulling away, they're talking about selling their stuff, they're talking about, moving away to another, wonderful place, which honestly in this goddamn this world, there's no good damn place to live right now. Um, you know, those are the major warning signs of somebody that is either having contemplations of suicide, is having the thoughts, is having the feelings, because there's also feelings with suicide as well. I don't think a lot of people, maybe a lot of people know that. Um, and when you have somebody that's going through those kinds of things, like Chris just said, it is imperative. It is your duty, if you can, your duty, if you can, to get them to 988 or get them a resource. Because
Yeah.
the last thing that you want on your conscience or on your mind is if they take their lives, then that now introduces survivor guilt. And that is something that a lot of and that's kind of going into to talking about, right? The military is very big with the survivor guilt. And I'm pretty sure if I remember correctly, and Chris can correct me if I'm wrong, most probably 50%, almost, not saying all, almost 50% of the suicides come from survivor guilt within the military. And then the other 50% is definitely mental health related traumas and or issues.
I mean, that's probably true. And I think part of that is so there's also a misnomer out there that most veteran and military deaths by suicide result of the stressors of combat. So this may be shocking to most to hear, but most veterans and military members that die by suicide have never been to combat. So I can see
Mhm.
where you would go. The next step is, I didn't deploy, but I have friends that did deploy, and then now those friends, died in combat. I could see where that would definitely lead to survivor's guilt. But I would hope, everyone listening to me, I've been to combat. I've lost friends both in combat and I've lost friends to death by suicide. In both cases, they're tragedies, and I mourn both losses. But I do have to say that I do mourn the loss of someone who makes the decision to die by suicide a little bit more because, I want to do all I can to prevent that from happening. And so whenever I hear, I've, it's not a competition, but I've lost more friends to suicide than I have to combat. And so it saddens me every time that happens. So I don't think, I know for me, that's what propels me in this work. Um, you talk about stigma, we've talked about, military service members and veterans and, how they can get to a place, a dark place where they're, contemplating suicide. And, on the outside, you won't know it because there's sometimes calm before the storm. So they maybe are resolute with their decision. And so find themselves in a place of calm. But what I would like to say, what I'd like to offer is, if you are having thoughts of suicide, if you are struggling with your mental health, really and truly, what I want you to do, there does not have to be anybody around. It could be just you and your own thoughts, but I do want you to voice out loud to yourself that I am not okay right now. There's something powerful, whether you're speaking to a clinician, whether you're speaking to a religious leader, whether you're speaking to a friend, a peer support specialist, there's something powerful about saying what you talk about feelings, right? There's something powerful about saying it out loud. Once you say it out loud, it becomes more tangible. I am not okay. And we talk about it all the time. It's okay to say that you're not okay, but actually say that. And then after you say that, give yourself a day, take a beat, take a pause, take some time, um, call 988, call a friend. You don't even have to tell the friend why you're calling, but just call a friend, a family member, someone, and just talk to them. Again, build that connection. Say, I'm not okay. Call somebody, talk to somebody, give yourself time, and then go. We talked about this isolation. Go and be where someone else is. Again, you don't have to tell them why you're doing this. Go see a friend, go see a family member, get in close proximity to another human being, go to a ball game, go to something, be where other people are. Don't go to places that make you feel unsafe. So if anxiety goes up when you're around large crowds, just go where there's going to be a few people or just one. And then truly, I want people to listen to this part because firearms are a large part in the decision making process when somebody chooses to die by suicide. I am not advocating that we take firearms away from folks. What I am advocating, especially in the military, we're trained to be safe around weaponry. and other means that can cause lethality. So whatever that is in your life, whether it is a firearm, whether it is medication, illicit or prescribed, to me it doesn't matter. Whatever that means is create some distance. If you have, hopefully, you have a way of locking up your weapons at home, but just keep them safe from yourself. Lock them up. Um,
Take your firing
break
pins
down the
out.
yeah, yeah, break down the components, right? Remove the weapon from the ammunition. What I'm telling you is buy some time with whatever lethal means that is, so that your body has time to decompress and get back to we talked about being tired and in pain and not being able to make decisions. In these 24 hours that I'm talking about, I would like you to rewind that. Get the rest that you can, build connections where you can, build in safety where you can, because if studies have shown, if you can give yourself 10 minutes after the crisis is upon you and you've made the decision to die by suicide, if you could pause that for 10 minutes, even up to an hour, that your chances of dying by suicide dramatically decrease. In fact, you may not die by suicide. And the hope is that this is a trained response, that when you become overwhelmed, when you become um, tired, and you're in pain, that this training that we're talking about will kick in, that you will say it out loud, that you will give yourself time, that you will build in safety, that you will build in connection. And I don't care if you have to do that once a day, once a week, once a month, once a year. Once that training is in you, the hope is that we can turn the tide on people dying from suicide at the rates that they're dying now. To the point, to zero is the ultimate goal. But definitely where we're at is, I mean, one suicide is one too many, and thousands every year. We're over 100,000 since the wars began. Um, we've gone too far. We need to roll this back.
Yeah, you know, Chris had stated, okay not to be okay. And there's actually a song called "It's Okay Not to Be Okay" by Demi Lovato.
You
Um,
guys sing it now? Are you gonna sing this?
you want me to sing it? I'm not. I'm not.
Sure.
I'm not going to sing it. I will read the lyrics off, but it goes and starts feeling like a drop in the ocean that nobody notices. Maybe it's all in your head, feeling like you're trapped in your own skin, and now your body's frozen, broken down, you've got nothing left. When you're high on emotion and you're losing your focus and you feel too exhausted to pray, don't get lost in the moment or give up when you're closest. All you need is somebody to say, "It's okay not to be okay. It's okay not to be okay." When you're down and feeling ashamed, it's okay not to be okay. I totally just did that.
I mean, that's great. I'm just saying, and everybody can vote on this podcast in the comments. Vote whether you want Mark to actually take it to the next level and put some music with that and actually sing it next time. I'm really looking forward to that vote.
They can watch me play Beat Saber. How about that? I sing when I'm doing that. Oh god. All right. uh masking, you know, we've talked about warning signs. Now let's talk about the masking, Um humor, deflection, right? Ha 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 ha. If anybody knows who Chester Bennington is, he was the lead singer of Linkin Park. And his suicide hit me very, very hard. As a LP Forever fan. And I can tell you that uh, I kind of have studied his death on many occasions, and I know a lot of other LP fans have too. But the night before he took his life, he was alive, active, playing games with his family, laughing, being humorous, joking around, you know, being being himself is what it looked like. But if you listen to any lyrics to any of the Linkin Park songs, Numb, Breaking the Habit, New Divide, um, all of the songs in Linkin Park that Chester had sung, all the lyrics that he had sung, if you go back through and you really take a deep dive into their lyrics, the dude was in so much pain and he was reaching out in song and nobody ever saw it. All that they saw was is the selfishness of themselves. And I hate to say it like that, but that's what happens when you're a musician, right? You know, he did that and ended up taking his own life because of his own demons, especially with his best friend that that killed himself as well. Chris, I can't remember his last name. Um, but there are many artists out there that a lot of people can contribute to mental health. There's a lot of really good bands that actually help with mental health. I say music is my therapy because even going to seeing a therapist myself, I fucking hate it. And I get more out of a session, about an hour session of listening to music than I do with a therapist. Um, and I think that, maybe that's just my generation. Um, I don't know like what, Chris's generation would, how they would feel about therapy,
Hang on,
but
Mark. What do you mean? What were you talking about? We're the same generation.
no, we're not.
I can't believe you just called me out like that. But it's true, right? I mean, but I would come back with saying it's both, right? I think there's definitely, and I know you feel the same way, but there's value in an hour with a clinician. There's
Yeah,
value with an hour of listening to music, an hour of online, gameplay, an hour of being. I mean, so however you spend that hour, I think it can be therapeutic if you want it to be, right? Some people, they find sometimes family being stressful, so sometimes it's good to get away. Uh, it's therapeutic to be with friends, but sometimes you do want to be alone. So and I know you feel the same way. There's nothing wrong with going, out into nature and just being alone with yourself and your
yeah,
thoughts. As long as you're getting something out of it, I think you can spend that hour many different ways.
yeah,
And
and
yes, I mean, we had albums made out of concrete back in my generation. Um, but yeah, I mean, there's
the
in every
record's coming
generation.
back. The record's coming
You're
back. You
right.
know
You're
that.
absolutely
Vinyl's
right.
coming back.
But not concrete. I mean, we made ours out of stone. We had to hand carve them
Oh God.
ourselves.
And I think you actually just hit on something, and it sparked a wonderful squirrel thought in my brain. Um, Gaming is an actual it's therapeutic. And I know that there's a lot of studies going on right now about actually how gaming does help individuals. I feel for me, when I get online, when I go into VC and I'm playing like Minecraft or I'm playing Space Engineers or I'm playing Path to Exiles 2, and there's people that start joining and then they start asking me if I can help them with stuff, then I get really annoyed. But there's also the people that will come in and they'll just start talking about their day or they'll ask you how your day was. And that's the kind of culture we have in Troa. And mental health, literally a therapy session starts. That's how I see it. It's literally a therapy session that starts because somebody is starting to talk about, their day. They're starting to talk about, feelings of that they're having. And yeah, you can do that with a therapist, but I'm going to be honest right now, and I know all the viewers that struggle through mental health, and yourself included, Chris. Some therapists just suck, and they don't care. All that they care about is that hour and that money, and that's it. And I've actually had that happen a couple times to myself, and I'm in the Indianapolis area, so we got quite a bit with mental health, but, like, some of our therapists out here, they suck, and it's not something that you can suck at because, if a therapist that you go to and then all of a sudden you decide to take your life because you're not able to get the help, that's shitty.
Well, I don't want to go too far down this
Rabbit
this
hole.
avenue, but I will say this. You're right. Not all counselors are created equal, so to speak. Um, we have such a shortage in America and really worldwide on trained clinicians, um, that as long as you meet the standard and you go to school, you pass all the tests, and get a job or have your own private practice, you can be a counselor. But some counselors just aren't the same. And so here's what I have to say about that. I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, but here's what I have to say about that. This is why you have to be your own best advocate, right? If you're with a clinician, maybe they are great. Maybe 10 friends of yours say, you know what, you have to go to Bob or Jane because they are absolutely the best counselor we've ever had. And then you go to Bob or Jane and you didn't connect. You know what? That's okay. In Columbia, South Carolina, we again, we have a lot of clinicians. We have the Veterans Administration. We have lots of nonprofits. We have lots of private practice. I know some areas don't have that, but even if you think your choices are minimal, be your best advocate and find another therapist. If you're a caregiver, a loved one of someone who is struggling and you know that they're having a hard time with this therapist, be their advocate. Maybe the person receiving the treatment, you know, they don't want to make waves, so to speak, or they don't want, it's a hassle sometimes, changing, therapists. Help be that advocate for someone else and help them make that transition because especially if you spent time with someone, you know it can be, the loss of that time can feel like you're taking a step backwards, but I promise you, be your best advocate and be the advocate for somebody close to you to try to make a good connection with a therapist.
Yeah, and I'm gonna put this, to the chat. Hopefully, we'll get some comments on that. But do you guys prefer in person or do you prefer virtual therapy sessions? So just let us know in the comments because there's a very big uptick in virtual, and I'm kind of curious to see what a lot of people think about that.
Well,
All
you
right.
talked about generational. I'll put a vote in. You're like 20 something and I'm like 70 something, I guess, according to you. Like there's this big age difference between us. I would rather have an in-person therapist. That's just not always the case. But yes, so if we're tallying votes, for me personally, I vote for in person, but I know not everybody feels that way.
Mine's virtual because
Absolutely.
it has been because of my schedule. It's mostly because of my schedule, right? Uh, you know, uh, a lot of people know that Troa, is an organization, know what we do, but they don't know how much work actually goes into it. And then you have your day job as well, and then you tack on, you know, Trella. It yeah, it's a lot, but I usually have about a Wednesday or Thursday, conversation. I found a very good virtual therapist, which is great. And if we go over the hour, they don't like say, "Hey, we're 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 at the hour, we can save this for the next session." Sometimes we'll go over about an hour and 30, 40 minutes and they're okay with it. So, and they only charge the insurance for the 1 hour time slot. So I think that is actually good. But okay, next we're
Well,
gonna talk.
so before you go on to that, I do want to add another thing about being a caregiver or just being a caring human being, next to somebody who you think there's something in your gut telling you that things are not okay with this friend or family member of yours, and you don't know sometimes what to do. And I will tell you, the same way where we talked about the broken arm or leg analogy, if somebody um, broke their leg, we typically, unless this is your specialty, typically we wouldn't say, "Hey, let me set that bone for you. Let me fix it." That it sounds silly saying it out loud like that, but that's what we do sometimes with our friends and family members that are hurting. We will try to fix the problem whenever they say, "I'm not okay," or when they say, "I'm thinking about suicide." We go into fix it mode. So that's not the time to be, you know, trying to fix, what the problem is. You know, if you're feeling this way inside your gut, just ask them directly. Are you thinking about, here's how Chris does it. Um, hey Mark, I see that you've been going through some things, with work and other things going on in your life. Sometimes when folks go through these things, sometimes they think about suicide. Are you thinking about suicide? So that's how I say it. But the takeaway from that is ask directly about suicide. If your gut's telling you that, ask directly. And then after you ask, if they say, yes, I am thinking about suicide, stay with them, either virtually or on the phone. In the military, we have ask care escort. So once you ask the question and they say yes, then you care enough about them to stay with them until they get to the next level of care. And then you escort them to that. Now, escorting, in this context, might not be walking them, to a therapist or to, a doctor or to, you know, whatever next level of care that they need. Sometimes it's just, you know, being there for them, like on for 988. A way it might look with 988 is a couple of different ways. You know, with all this technology, if we're both on a cell phone together, you can actually, add 988 onto a three-way call as long as you have, your friend or family member's permission, and you can help them get connected to 988 that way. So I'm not going to leave you. If you want me, I could stay on the line with you and we can call 988 together. Or if you are with someone and they don't want to make the phone call, you can call for them. You can tell, and the 988 operators are very knowledgeable about these scenarios, right? You can call them and it's like, I have Mark with me. I hear some things he's going through. He wants to talk to somebody about, his thoughts of suicide. And then they will help take it from there. And then after that, you know, after they get the care that they need, really the best thing you can do is stay connected with them. If they do go to a therapist or they do talk to 988, ask them after the fact, how did that how was that for you? And if that didn't work, then you can find another resource. We could have 100 podcasts, one every week for years and talk about all the resources that are out there. What I would do is find the resources that are in your area or in the area of the person who's having thoughts of suicide and help them, connect, to those. There's equine therapy. There's, getting out in nature. You have all kinds of resources out there. Help them get the care that they need. So ask directly about suicide. Stay with them either physically or on the phone. Don't be the fix it in this time frame. If they were having a heart attack and they were on the ground, that would not be the time to talk to them about, what, I think you were eating too many hamburgers, before this happened. I know it sounds silly and we wouldn't do that. So let's not do that whenever somebody's struggling, with mental health, and then get them to the resources that they need and then follow up with them afterwards.
Very, very well said, Chris. That was very good. So we're gonna move on now. The edge. All right. So the edge. I'm tired. I'm mentally drained. I feel like I'm a burden. Nothing matters, nothing will change. You know, what goes through your head in that moment, right? What are you why are those things is it loud or is it quiet? Is it like a loud, little positive and negative, little demons on our agent, whatever you want to call them, right? And at the end of the day, they're all our demons, you know. But how do you get past the edge? 'Cause that's pretty
or
deep.
step back from the edge before you go over the edge.
Exactly.
There's always a moment before the fall, before somebody, in suicide prevention training, we talk about the waterfall, and the barriers to not going over the waterfall. But inevitably, people fall over the waterfall and they fall into what we call the river of suicide. And so we try to catch people before the fall. We try to the best of our ability, recognize what's happening, um, and we want to step in before it's too late, right? And so that's what we've been talking about for going on an hour now. We want to catch the veteran or first responder or anyone in your life before they make that decision. Um, and we want to we're not just trying to save lives after they fall over into the water. We're trying to help them recognize those moments before they even happen. You're talking about the edge of
Prevent
a
it.
cliff or edge of a waterfall. There are absolutely things that we can do in primary prevention to help people before they ever get to the edge. That's, I think, anyway, Mark, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that's what we're attempting to do. Take a step
Yep.
back from the edge, um, before the crisis happens.
Absolutely. Like, you know, even if you're not with that individual or I think how I want to kind of talk about this is how is that individual getting to that point, right? We've gone through, I think, six different phases of what happens right before the fall. And I think the edge is a sign that if you if you are getting to that point of being a feeling of like always a burden, or you're feeling these just it's miserable to be you. I wouldn't put it past even I'm a two-time survivor of suicide myself, right? And I can tell you that when I got into those modes myself, it was all because I was feeling like a burden. I was tired. I didn't care. I didn't care what anybody thought of me. And I was just nothing to matter to me. It didn't matter. And there was nothing that anybody could do because I had already made that decision. And I think that that's what we're trying to get to the listeners and to anybody that is struggling themselves, with suicide or with the thoughts of suicide. When you get to the edge, it's not just hey, we're here at the edge, we're going to jump or we're not going to jump. 9 times out of 10, and you're jumping. And the only thing that is either going to save you is by the grace of God or by some something chemically in your mind has changed to where you're like, okay, I'm not going to do it, or you're just too numb to do it because you don't know, you don't have a plan, you don't know what you're going to do. And when you get to the edge, that's where the plans start to really come together, and that's where the fall of the individual happens. And that's where the fall that this is the most critical point in somebody's mental health where if you are a family member and you know about this, you need to get them help. So, you know, I think that what do you do, when you're close, right? Again, this is going into the mindset of an individual. Pause, delay decisions, change an environment, call or text someone. You know, what helped you or what helped me get through or what helped Chris, what helped anybody get through that moment of taking your life. And for me, it was my mom. Um, the first time I was, uh, it was really bad and I got a call and I usually had my phone on vibrate or mute. And I thought I had turned it on mute, but evidently my mom had a special ringtone. So I picked up the phone and she just asked me how I was doing. And I said, I'm not doing good. And that is the moment that I took a step back and realized that life had some meaningful reason to stay. And my mom, her and I kind of talked a little bit, but all that I remember from that conversation is she asked me if I would change my mind and if I could give her, like Chris had said, give me 24 hours. Um, so um, that is where how it happened for me, and I think that for a lot of our listeners, I think it's similar. Maybe it wasn't your mom, maybe it wasn't, a family member, maybe it was a friend, maybe somebody pulled you, maybe somebody knocked on your door, maybe something stopped the instance from happening. And I think that a lot of us that have mental health disorders or that have PTSD or that have CPTSD or that have anxiety or that have depression, I think a lot of us get scared for ourselves because technically you become a different person. You're not the same person at all.
I agree with that. It's similar to, like we've been talking about a couple of times. If you get really tired, you do sometimes turn into a different person. Not to make light of it, but you know, my wife calls me goofy sometimes when I get really tired. I'll just start, I'll get the giggles, or I find, things that are funny maybe when, they're not really funny. You just get, the tired sillies. Um, Sometimes, people get really irritable, when they are tired. So you do go into, a different persona, whenever major crisis is happening in your life. You'll do things that you typically wouldn't do, um, if you were, healthier mentally. That's why we ask the questions. You know, are you doing things? Do you risky behavior? You talked about, giving away and selling things, but risky behavior. If you start to not value your life, you sometimes will do things that are not safe, um, because you don't care. Maybe you don't have an active plan to die by suicide, but maybe, if you're driving recklessly or doing other, you know, activities in your life that are dangerous, you know, if you have the mindset, well, it doesn't matter to me what happens if I die, I'm hoping that that would cause a moment of pause that you can ask yourself, why am I thinking that? Um, and then hopefully that would lead to a broader question of, you know, how can I get better?
Yeah, and I think, you nailed it on the head, right? It's it's different for everybody. It's you may be goofy, though that is an odd thing that happens. The chemicals in your brain do different things. And, you know, I think that everybody has a different way that they go through that part of being at the edge. If you are somebody that is just a jerk, right? And then you become this happy-go-lucky individual, that's a sign. And that is something that people need to pay attention to. Um, you know, now we get to what should others do, right? Um, you need to ask directly. You need to go up to that individual and you need to ask, are you thinking of what are you thinking of suicide? Are you okay? Is do you have thoughts of suicide? It is a very that's just like we've said this whole time. It's a scary word for a lot of people. But you gotta be able to protect the ones that you love as well. So I mean, if somebody's going through it, don't ignore the signs. Just be there for them. Uh, my I made a promise to one of my friends for the second attempt. I made a pinky swear. Is what I did. I made a pinky promise, and he told me, don't ever do this again. It's like he's like, I love you, man. You're worth, more than you think. And like you make a pinky promise with me that, you'll never do this again. And I did. And then I became an advocate. And that was back in 2014, 2015-ish, right before I started Troa. And I can tell you all that the advocacy side of being on the other side of suicide, or being in that position of actually wanting to take your life, it's very powerful. It's super powerful. um Being able to share your story, being able to talk about it, not being afraid of what it's going to do to you anymore. Have there been times where, in the past couple of years that it's been rough? Absolutely. Have there been times where I have still thought about it? Yeah, but that is why I have therapy. That is why I have people that love me. That is why I have these tools to ensure that I don't go back that. That's why, I wear the Be a Lifesaver, and I talk about that. I talk about everything. And I think Chris does too. I think um, it's all about how you are with an individual.
Absolutely. You know, advocacy work, we love all of our volunteers, whatever area that I'm working in, whether it's at work or in the nonprofits that I work with, we love all of our volunteers. But you can tell the volunteers that have a passion for the work that they're doing, most of the time, if not every time, something has happened in their life, whether it's a personal experience, whether it's they've lost a family member to suicide, or a fellow service member to suicide. Um, they're just there's extra energy with certain folks, and to be frank, sometimes you really never know where that energy comes from, but you can just tell that they've been touched by suicide in such a way that it gives uh, power to their purpose and to their energy. Um, and I've never asked you this before, but in relating that story that you just related, is that why you started Troa? Like you had that moment. I don't know if it was a day or a week or a month later, but is that why Troa was started?
Tro was started because of one of my friends, Bobby, um, who I held as he was dying. He had hung himself, and I was in the other room. I heard the noise, and I ran in there, and he was out, and it was one of my best friends, and it was one of the reasons that I myself also got into advocacy um, prior to my own attempts because of he's the whole reason for Charla. Absolutely. But that's one of the really things that I love about the advocacy world right now is I mean, almost everybody in our organization that we have as a volunteer has some type of story. We have brought on a good volunteers, I'll say that for sure, and I think that Troy has a long way to go, and we're not stopping. We are moving forward. There's a lot of really cool things that are coming. Um, the mission for TROA is to stop the stigma on mental health, and it is going to be plastered everywhere where we go. You know, Chris has got the official first banner that he's going to use at walks. You know, there are so many things happening right now in our organization, and Ravens Whispers is just one of them. Ravens Whispers was a literally a conversation and then a thought and then a hey, we're gonna do this, and we did it within 6 months. Um, season one is so phenomenal. You'll learn a lot about myself. You'll learn a lot about the leadership in Troa. Season two gets just even deeper into the different roots of ways of mental health. Um, our next adventure will be talking about PTSD and what it does to your mind and as an individual. We may have a guest on. I don't know yet. I'm still thinking about how that's going to happen. Um, but I kind of already teased the next episode, so I guess I'll let Chris go ahead and do his outro.
So, I mean, really, the only thing I want to say at this point is basically the same thing that I say at whether it's suicide prevention training or a speaking event or we're doing this podcast is if this conversation saves even one person, all of the work and effort is worth it. If one person calls 988 because of the work and conversation that we're doing, it is absolutely all worth it. So thank you for the work that
Absolutely.
you're doing, Mark, and keeping this work moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, um that is very powerful what he just said. Um just takes one to sh- to show that what we're doing. And last year we saved 9 lives. This year we're at 7 lives so far for the year. And I don't say that as a uh I would say so far because we know there's going to be more. we know and our team knows that the hard truth of doing this kind of work is we're going to lose a lot of people. We're not going to be able to catch everything. We know that. I think we do. I'm pretty sure we do. And if we can just save one life, it's all worth it. So, with that, I thank everybody for listening. And I thank my guest star, Chris. And we are, going to be doing a release, I believe, in about a week for this episode. It is April 12th of 2026 when we recorded this. And go ahead and just, remember, Raven's Whispers. We're always talking about those really really deep topics, and it's very raw, it's very open, it's very honest, and it's one whisper and one conversation at a time. So thank you and have a good night.
Hey, ya, shields in line, brothers, sisters, we bind with time. From hearth to hall, from field to fjord, we stand as one, the realms of Asgard.